Hey, Jordan. How's it going? What's up?
What's up?
Oh, not much. I was just, I had DVR'd I'm sure you watched this. I know you catch Jimmy Kimmel every single week.
Mm-hmm.
The interview this week with George W. Bush, I recorded it on my DVR. I've watched it a couple times now. Hilarious. Did you catch that?
Yeah. It's just so great to see a president with decency.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, just a guy that, in hindsight, I may not have agreed with everything that he did, but someone that respected the office, that was a respectful person, that kind of brought this kind of dignity.
None of the tweeting. Yeah.
No tweeting. Exactly. He never tweeted. He was too busy, invading Iraq and Afghanistan and these places, and he didn't have time for that. I respect that about him.
Doing things the right way. Yep.
Yeah, doing things the right way. So I always just appreciate seeing the old guy, anytime he's on TV, I'm always happy to hear from him. Lovely guy. I hope his painting career is going well. I'm happy for him. It brings a smile to my face every time I see him.
Giving candy to Michelle Obama. It's just what
a
guy.
We love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gregarious.
More of him, please.
Yeah.
I was clapping in between every word.
Yeah, exactly. If only the Republican Party could kind of go back to what it was like during the George W. Bush era, which as we all remember, was just like really great and led to a lot of good things for the people of the United States and the world.
And abroad.
Frankly.
Yeah, everywhere else. Everyone loved it when he was in charge.
We all loved it. Yeah. I also got the Oscars the other night. Did you watch the Oscars this year? I did, again. Just like Jimmy Kimmel. I know you catch this every single year. I don't know why I'm asking, but you saw the Oscars.
Yeah, I was watching kind of like supercuts of the best speeches, year over year, and just so great.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, conservatives are complaining about how it's becoming all political and everything, but I think it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. I was a little bit disappointed with the Best Picture. It was won by Nomadland. I was hoping that Judas and the Black Messiah would win that. So that was a little unfortunate. It's a movie that I would have seen 3 times if I could have,
Nice.
And just it goes in a long list of the different Oscar movies that I've enjoyed over the last couple of years, just off the top of my head, like Green Book. That was a good one.
Classic, yeah.
Yeah, Selma,
Okay.
Moonlight.
Yep.
All of these.
Oh, so you're like it. What about Hidden Figures? I bet you like that one.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Okay. Yeah.
I love that. 12 Years a Slave. Yeah, everyone, when someone comes to my house, they look at my DVD collection, they know that I'm like what my values are and what I care about.
Yeah, kind of the whole like politics through consumption thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, ultimately the Oscars, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it. I loved seeing all the outfits and everything. Was a little disappointed with the result, but, what can you do?
It's okay.
Did you actually see that? I haven't actually seen Judas and the Black Messiah, so I'm not sure if I want to have a... No. I think it might be okay. I think it might be pretty good. I mean, a lot of the reviews I've seen are pretty decent.
People seem to like it, but like...
As you pointed out, it is a weird connection. It's a weird connection having like these big corporations start cashing in on biopics about people like Fred Hampton. You have to say, like, even if it's being treated respectfully, ultimately the sort of purpose of that politically, like, is anything good happening from that? I don't know. I would like to see it, though. I would like to see the movie.
Rob, I don't watch a lot of movies. I don't do like a lot of anything with the TV.
Yeah.
So,
no, I know.
I can count on one hand the amount of movies I watched last year, and I think it's 2.
Yeah.
I watched Uncut Gems.
What'd you think of that?
And I loved it.
Yeah, that was very good.
I actually think I'm going to watch it again tonight. My partner hasn't seen it, so I think we're going to.
Oh, cool.
Streaming thing.
You got to get some calming candles or incense going through.
I think that's a good movie to help us wind down. I think we might fire it up at like midnight.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that'll be good.
Just a relaxing evening.
And then Midsummer was the only other one I saw.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Nothing else stands out.
Yeah, I used to be kind of a movie mindset guy, but I feel like having kids has made this more difficult. I don't get to go. I mean, there's also a global pandemic. It's another reason I don't go to the movie theater that much, but I haven't really been. I've been kind of slacking. I'm trying to pick up the pace again. I'm trying to go back to my movie mindset roots. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Oh, you're a big film guy, huh?
I was at one point.
I mean, every minute you spend watching a film is a minute you could be gaming.
That's true.
So I want you to remember that next time you're thinking about going to the movies.
That is true. That's a good attitude to have.
Yeah.
You're kind of letting your friends and your sort of squad mates down when you spend other time seeing films, interacting with your family, things like this. Well, that's true.
Let's just say hypothetically, you guys are dropping somewhere, your squad mate gets knocked, they need a revive, they turn to you, Rob, please help, I'm running out of health, and you are at the theater. I mean, it's not just about your enjoyment, your fulfillment, and your commitment to the gaming lifestyle. You're letting your squad down.
Yeah, how are we supposed to wipe out Tomato Town like this? It's not going to happen.
See, I knew deep down you understood, but
folks, it is Jesus. It is The Insurgents, episode 66. Rob Rousseau here, along with Jordan Uhl. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in.
Rob, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm just kind of skipping that whole bit.
Figured I would wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, well, I've got to move this along. I'm trying to be a professional host here. If you noticed that we did not put out an episode last week, you would actually be incorrect. We did put out an episode. It was a special premium episode for our Substack subscribers. And I encourage everyone, if you didn't get a chance to please go back and listen to this episode with Arash Azizada and Sarah Sahim talking about the forever war in Afghanistan, this announcement of the Afghanistan withdrawal. It was really great to connect with both of them about that. Very good episode. If you're not subscribed over on Substack, make sure that you are subscribed so you can have access to all this content. We are shifting to this release strategy of doing one-offs of these premium episodes and regular episodes. So if you want to get the full Insurgents experience, that's how you have to do it. You have to subscribe on Substack. Check out the previous episode about Afghanistan. It's very good. But that's what we did last week. And we are here this week with Dharna Noor, who is a staff writer at Earther. And we're talking about the climate stuff, the Earth Day Climate Summit that just happened. We had a really great conversation with Dharna Noor this week.
Yeah, she rocks. Her reporting is great. One of the people I look to for good climate reporting, because so much of that beat is like typically very deferential to the Biden administration. Because yeah, sure, by comparison, they're great compared to Trump, but like it's insufficient if we want to adequately tackle climate change in the time frame we need to. But it's just like the benefit of being the immediate predecessor, or the immediate, like the person who follows Trump. So what is the word for that? My mind just went blank.
You're really putting me on the spot there, trying to kind of guess the word that you're trying to think of.
Successor.
Yes.
Man, I'm an idiot today.
That's okay.
Yeah,
no problem. I know you've had a long day doing this stuff. I know you're just doing deep dive on Young Turks. Just before we
did. Thanks for the plug, Rob.
No problem. My pleasure.
Aman Saleh, who is fucking kick-ass. She was on a hunger strike for 23 days to shine a light on and call for an end to the U.S.-backed Saudi blockade in Yemen that is starving people. They're not letting oil into the country. The Saudis aren't, with the assistance of the United States. They're not letting oil into the country, which means they can't, gas up trucks. They can't run generators at hospitals, and as a result, they can't move food around the country.
Well, I'm pretty sure the U.S. is denying the oil entry defensively, though. So,
yeah, exactly. It's a defensive strategy, right?
It's a defensive blockade of these vital services and vital resources. Yeah.
Yeah, but Aman's great. She's been on multiple times. She was on multiple times during her hunger strike. She, at the urging of her doctor, has wrapped it up, and now they're pivoting to other campaign tactics, but they're great. Yemeni Liberation Movement, they're out of Michigan. They fucking rock. Can't support them enough. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, if you catch the VOD from today, we had a lot of fun because she's eating again. She's with her family, and we were dancing and joking around. It was very fun.
That's nice.
If you want to see me dance, it's on there.
very, very cool. Very cool. And I in fact do want to see that, so I am
Never
going
mind.
to.
I'm going to go delete the VOD. I'll be back.
I'm going to do that. I don't know what else is there to get into. I feel like there's so much going on. There is the whole Derek Chauvin trial that happened. I feel like this is a whole separate episode. I don't really want to get into this subject now in the few minutes we have here before we bring on Dharna. But it's worth pointing out that I feel like, American police are just as out of control as ever. There's a bunch of cases now of police killings just in the last couple of weeks while this trial was going on. While they're waiting for the verdict, Columbus police killed a female black teenager. It's so fucking out of control. It's so hard to take this seriously as some positive development of justice when nothing systemic about this issue is being changed in any way. As we pointed out repeatedly, you have Biden just basically still promising to give more money to police for training and things like this. And just after a certain point, we have to just completely reject this entire approach. But it doesn't seem like that's going to happen in the mainstream level of the Democratic Party anytime soon. And I don't know what the solution is. It's very fucking grim. It's definitely something we're going to cover more in depth in the next couple of weeks. But I don't know. I don't know what we're supposed to do about this.
Yeah. There's concerns around the continuation of the 1033 program, which gives military surplus gear to police departments. I mean, Biden had pledged to return to the Obama era approach, but which they didn't really institute till the very end of his administration, after for years loading them up with fucking MRAPs and tanks and just bullshit. But we'll see. We'll see how they respond to that. But like, as so often is the case, and you'll hear throughout even the conversation with Dharna, it's a lot of just promises. It's a lot of claims. It's a lot of we will. Until we see action, it doesn't fucking matter. So we'll see. Remains to be seen. But yes, like Rob said, it's not something we could really sufficiently do. And we thought about how we would approach it, and we just also it didn't feel right for just he and I to talk about it. So we want somebody who you would benefit from hearing from to join us to talk about that and like the broader implications.
Yes. So stay tuned for that. Again, it's a whole separate episode, so we don't need to dive into this like huge broad topic right now. In fact, why don't we bring on Dharna now? We had a really great conversation with Dharna Noor about this Earth Day Climate Summit. Let's get to that, because I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation, and I think we went to a pretty good place with this one. What do you think, Jordan?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so Dharna Noor will be joining the show right after this.
And now we're joined by Dharna Noor, who is a writer with Earther, which is Gizmodo's climate vertical. Dharna, we kick off every episode with an important question. We ask everybody this, so we know who we're dealing with, what kind of person we're dealing with.
Get it all out there.
Yeah, we break the ice really fast. It's a tough one. But Dharna, are you a gamer?
Oh, damn, hard-hitting questions. No, like literally not at all. I'm so sorry. I've like never even had a game
That's unfortunate.
console in my life. I'm so sorry, y'all. If you want me to leave, I can.
Do you want to keep going with this, Rob?
I'm thinking about it. I know I'm kind of on the fence on this right now.
Never?
No, that's okay.
Never?
Your parents you didn't get one of those like off-brand consoles, or even those little, you remember those little handheld devices that were just like basically just moving a little digital picture like up and down?
No, I mean,
those things?
The only thing I think I had was like a Gigapet. That's like truly it. I mean, I've like, obviously I've played video games at like other people's houses, but I'm definitely not a gamer. I don't know like anything.
Gigapet.
I'm looking at the judges, and they say Gigapet counts. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
You are in fact a gamer. See, everybody's a gamer, which is the point of the show.
Yeah, I was a hardcore gamer.
Yeah,
we got those banned. The Tamagotchis were banned at my school. There was like a rich kid at our school who had like 10 all on like a keychain. He would like hook them all to like a little like belt hook, like grappler hook thing. Yeah, and he had like a bunch just to flaunt his Tamagotchi like family, and it's just like, that just seems difficult. That's a lot of work.
It's like the Rolly of like a third grade or whatever.
And now it's cool because now if you want to get back into Tamagotchi, all you have to do is get a job with Amazon in the Amazon warehouse, and you get one of those you get a little pet, and when you do your tasks with a certain level of productivity, they feed it and they let it, have little perks and stuff, and that's how you keep it alive. It's wonderful.
Be your own Tamagotchi. Cool. I love it.
Dharna, we're happy to have you here, jokes aside, because you have been like out front on climate reporting and reporting in general in the green space, as we see a shift in people's willingness to think about, consider more robust climate initiatives and policies and proposals. And you're probably the first person that I saw who did critical reporting of the Biden administration's corporate-friendly appointees and staff. And I remember like when Cedric Richmond was tapped as like a liaison with the climate space or climate activists. I remember you had the piece. You had like the piece that kind of synthesized his record and how he never talked about air pollution, despite coming from one of the most populated census tracts, districts with the most populated. Yeah. So I've always appreciated your reporting. So it's really exciting to have you here as we celebrated Earth Day last week, and now we're seeing a bunch of pushes for, we've got the Thrive Act and the Thrive Agenda now introduced or proposed, and we've got the Green New Deal reintroduced, and all of these initiatives and Build Back Better to take on climate change. But let's start with like this summit last week that we were just trying to figure out the name of, which we'll just refer to as the Earth Day Summit. What are some of your takeaways, and what are some of the things that people should understand as we are now with all these different proposals on the table? Where do things seem to be going, and where is the energy kind of aligning behind? Is there like one or two green proposals for the Biden administration that seem to be kind of like the front runners?
Yeah. So thanks so much for having me, y'all. That's all really kind of you to say. The Earth Day Summit was, I think, sort of like indicative of the things that are good and bad about the Biden administration's climate policy in general. I think maybe my number one takeaway was that we really have to actually drill down on specifics and short-term goals and things. Like, words are really nice and all, but pledges themselves don't actually draw down carbon emissions, surprisingly. Saying that you're going to do something doesn't actually do it turns out. And so that's true for a lot of different countries. A lot of different countries have made these bold pledges to international climate policy, and then they've fallen short either of their own pledges or those pledges have fallen short of what's needed. So the Biden administration came out and was like, oh, we're going to draw down carbon emissions by 50%, which, 50% from 2005 levels, which is a huge, compared to what we've had before, that's like a really big deal. However, compared to what we actually need to do, that's just peanuts, basically. Particularly when we consider that the United States is the biggest historical emitter of greenhouse gases in history, responsible for almost a quarter of all carbon emissions ever. So yeah, I mean, lots of comparatively really bold promises that still do not come anywhere close. So that's, kind of one top line thing. I guess maybe another one is, man, on the second day of the climate summit, one of the first people, or the first person to speak actually was Bill Gates. So yeah, I know. So on the one hand, these bold emissions targets are, at least bold compared to what we've seen, maybe not bold compared to what we need. On the other hand, and the way we're going to get there is by putting Bill Gates in charge of, developing clean energy, which just, does not bode super well for workers or, the global south in general, or, just pretty troubling.
Yeah, I love how Bill Gates, this software developer, has now, I guess, become the arbiter of what we're doing with green energy. He's the one who decides, apparently, whether these global south countries get access to vaccines, apparently. I don't know. No one ever actually voted for this guy to be in this position, but it's amazing that somehow Bill Gates has managed to put himself at the center, front and center of all these conversations. And it's like, how did this happen? It's
That's
crazy.
exactly no one voted for him is exactly right. I mean, even if, and I don't obviously, but even if I thought that Bill Gates had some great ideas or whatever for how to take on the climate crisis in a just way, which I don't think he does. Who exactly is going to make sure that he does anything that he promised? His job is he's not accountable to any of us, obviously, right? So.
Yeah. Well, I imagine what people like Bill Gates really want is for, the United States government and other governments around the world to pour billions and billions of dollars into research and development to figure out, to go after these elusive technologies and the innovation we always hear about, like carbon capture and these things that are supposed to help alleviate this crisis. And then, of course, hand over the research and development to private companies so they can then use that to profit from these kind of technologies that the governments are developing.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that we've seen from, sort of in general, the Biden administration's climate proposals, the big infrastructure plan. There's lots of money, or at least there's lots of money, again, compared to what we've seen before. But how is that money getting distributed? And in the case of the Biden administration, a lot of the times the answer is in public-private partnerships, which I don't know why the profit motive should have to come into taking on the most urgent challenge of our time. But, that's Joe Biden.
Yeah. Because I wanted to zero in on something you were saying there, which is that, Biden's been getting a lot of kind of credit, I think, for these this bold agenda that he's putting forward. And this Earth Day Climate Summit was an example of this. And I think we can say, we can take a look at some of the things Biden has done, like bring them back into the Paris agreements and setting these bold targets for emissions reductions. But I think after a certain point, we have, like you pointed out, we have to start asking ourselves, what are we actually doing? At what point are we just saying the words? Are we saying the words that people want to hear while not actually backing that up with action? And it's amazing when you look at the long list now of different climate summits and meetings and these different events that have happened while these governments have come together to talk about this and make these kind of targets. And you put these on a timeline along with our global emissions, you see the number just continuing to rise after all these summits and all these meetings and all these bold promises. So after a certain point, we have to start asking our leaders, what are they actually going to do about this? And is it going to go beyond just words? And that's why I have a hard time getting excited about anything Biden or Justin Trudeau is saying. I'm in Canada, and it's been the same kind of a thing. We've made all kinds of promises about the climate over the last couple of decades. We've not abided by any one of these promises. The Paris Agreement was a big part of the news. It was a big part of the Trump administration's climate policy. Everyone made a big deal about that, about leaving the Paris Agreement and then Biden rejoining it. Well, Canada never left the Paris Agreement. We made those agreements. We never left. And meanwhile, none of the targets we've set we're not anywhere near achieving any of these targets. We've just continued to increase our emissions. We're on pace for our 2030 Paris emissions targets to hit those in 200 years or something like that. So we're just it makes no difference whether we've been in the Paris Agreement or not, because we're not backing up these words with actual action. And that's what I feel we can't let ourselves be impressed by Biden's bold agenda that he's setting if with the history of the last couple of decades of these kinds of agreements have shown that it hasn't really meant anything in terms of our actual emissions reductions, which is what we should be focusing on.
Totally. And I think that there are some things that Biden will follow through on in terms of increasing the output of renewable energy. I feel pretty confident that we really are going to see more electric vehicles and solar panels and things like that. But the question is is that just additive, or are you actually going to do anything to start winding down the polluting industries? Do you just have a shitload of oil and gas and then also some wind turbines, or do you also shut down fossil fuel companies, start transitioning big corporate agriculture to more regenerative forms of agriculture and things like that? And then obviously again that goes back into who exactly is going to be making money off of the doling out the the clean energy and all those things. I think, one thing that we've seen so far from the Biden administration is this, like, I mean, I'm like not trying to be crass or whatever, but really like an America First type policy. Like, maybe the clearest example is the kind of ramping up tensions with China. This whole like, oh, we need to outcompete China to be like the winners of like the new green economy or whatever. And there's been like some back and forth there. There's been some times where, they put out a joint statement with China about a week ago now where they said that they'd cooperate. So there's been some like reasons to maybe think that everything won't be so horrible. But like, I mean, why are we competing with China? Because we're trying to be the ones who are making the profit off of clean energy. Like we're making profit the important part of the energy transition, not only for us, but for like the nations who are going to be buying the technologies from us. So yeah, I mean, America First foreign policy is not anything that I'm particularly interested in seeing continue in climate policy.
You touched on it earlier, the Bill Gates thing. I find just so peculiar, but it also kind of intersects with another thing that has popped up that's somewhat related to climate. But so Bill Gates, I think part of why he is kind of thrust toward the forefront in this conversation is because he has been outspoken about ending meat consumption. Beef is such a hazardous, wasteful industry. You just use so much water to produce like a pound of beef. It's just so wasteful. Plus, on top of all of the ecological hazards from meat production and just like, just absolutely repugnant. Yeah, and everything about it. But now we see this week, and I don't want to get too much into like look at these right-wing losers trying to like own the libs, but like there's conversations around like reducing meat consumption or like banning beef in a more hysterical, reactionary narrative. But like there are conversations about reducing meat consumption, and Bill Gates had invested in companies like Beyond Meat. I think that was the one he invested in. But okay, like what is this whole issue about? Obviously, the right isn't being honest or forthcoming about what is actually at stake, but the ethics and environmental, with a specific focus on environmental consequences. What is actually going on here with the beef consumption issue?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's like kind of maybe obvious to say, but like the whole, like there's nothing actually in Biden's climate plans about like banning individual people from eating meat. It's just not the case. But beyond that, like, the lab meat or like fake meat things, it's a really interesting question, because in some sense, like, there should be policies to limit meat production, like, I mean, and not even just for ecological reasons, like, beef production, and for that matter, also like chicken production, dairy farms and things are responsible for tons of greenhouse gas emissions. They use up tons of land, but also they're like really horrible industries to work in, notorious for like labor exploitations, things like that. So like, it's not that we should not be considering policies that would like limit the production of meat. The question is just how you do that, right? So like, I don't know. I personally am kind of agnostic on the like fake meat stuff. I mean, I think that maybe there could be a role for like some of it, although it seems that on aggregate, like these Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger and shit can actually produce tons of carbon emissions too. I mean, half as many as meat production, but still, like, that's not great. That's a lot less than if we just ate like, mushrooms and spinach and shit. But I mean, yeah, like I could be convinced, I guess, that there could be some like public sector expansion of research and development into these like fake meats and lab meats and things. Maybe there's ways to reduce those carbon emissions, but like who gets to make money off of them? Who gets to control how much they cost and who has access to them? We obviously saw with like the Yellow Vest protests in France, and then more recently with Pete Buttigieg saying that he was going to impose like a mileage tax. We've seen how terrible an idea it is to just sort of impose like pollution taxes on ordinary people. And I think that forcing people to pay for eating burgers or something would not be a very good way of going about that.
Yeah, ultimately this idea of like offloading the responsibility of dealing with the decarbonization to like individual consumer choices. it's pretty much a lose-lose situation because it just like pisses people off tremendously, like we saw with the Yellow Vest protests, and leads to this kind of backlash. And it's interesting, the whole like meat controversy from this week. It's frustrating to see these things play out because you see the very bad faith way that conservatives spin this stuff. They kind of invent this fake story out of thin air about Biden wanting to ban meat, and then it provokes this kind of like counter reaction where they're saying, no, of course we don't want to do that. And we saw the same thing with fracking, like when Biden showed hesitancy with fracking, and it's like, well, Joe Biden wants to ban fracking, and then he has to kind of respond by saying, oh no, of course I love fracking. Fracking's the best. I think it's great. It's the same thing. And then so we have to have this conversation where it's like, oh, these conservatives are being ridiculous by inventing this fake controversy about banning meat, but then that limits our ability to have a like actual serious conversation about the fact that we do need to limit our consumption of these products, and we do need to completely reform the way that our whole food production system, which is creating the problem. And then this kind of like back and forth that develops from this, the conservatives and their bizarre kind of overreaction to then the backlash. It obscures this very real serious conversation we should be having.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, not to blame this on obviously like the environmental movement at large or whatever, but like part of the reason I think that the like hysterical response to any like mention of hamburgers and shit works is because like for so long there has been this association of climate policy with austerity, like with, just being like, oh, well, actually people, like regular people can have less, without obviously considering that like rich people emit far, far more in their daily lives than poor people do. Rich countries, rich nations emit far more than poorer countries do. But like, there's a reason. I mean, part of the reason it works, I think, is because people are so used to being outraged by being told what they can't have. And in fact, I think that as we've seen through, proposals under the Green New Deal and other things like it, there's so much opportunity actually for like joy and human flourishing and stuff that could come out of climate policy that has nothing to do with just, like policing people's behavior or telling people that they can't have the things that they want.
And you probably know more about this, but for people who aren't familiar, could you talk about how BP and other companies push this like carbon footprint bullshit to push responsibility back on the consumers instead of them, like the main drivers of carbon emissions and pollution?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. Basically, like the whole idea of the carbon footprint thing was, I think actually it started from a 1970s or something ad from BP, and like, I mean, the way that people now talk about carbon footprints is obviously always in terms of like what individual people can do, like turning off the water or like making sure you like get more efficient light bulbs or whatever. I don't think that there isn't a place for, or rather, I guess I think that there is a place maybe for like doing things individually, like if you feel like it, if it makes you remember that there's the potential to have a better world out there or whatever, but like no amount of people like individually reducing their pollution or anything is obviously going to come close to.
Yeah, it really does. Like, it really does make me feel physically ill when I see these companies that are like, we knew that climate change was happening in the early 70s. Our own scientists confirmed this. Our own scientists confirmed that it was our own behavior that was leading to this. We deliberately covered this up. We, funded junk science. We funded conservative media to obscure this, to ensure that we can continue to do this pollution regardless of what the consequences were, which we knew full well. That to me is a serious crime, like not only just something immoral, but a serious crime. And you have now these companies saying like, hey, we're all in this together. We all have to do our part. And it's like, no, we're not in this together. You did this. I can't stay. It makes me so angry.
Yeah, it's really wild. Oh my God. And then like to see in like the mid 2000s, BP had this whole thing where you could like use a calculator to see like your own personal carbon footprint based on all of the things that you use, as though the things that you use are not like, as though you have some kind of like immense choice in the matter. Like, not, I drive a car because I have to drive a car to get to work every day, and like I drive a cheap car because I can't afford an expensive one that uses less fuel, and there's no bus line or train around me, so I'm doing this every single day. And as though BP is not part of the reason that we have like such immense dependence on fossil fuels and other, lovely polluting aspects of our lives.
Well, like American culture is completely designed to ensure that is the only option for people. It's been specifically designed that people have to have cars.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So also I saw something this week that, I don't know, just like a flurry of like really bizarre stories and gaffes, and I mean some element of misinformation, but just like really, I don't know, this week has just been like a perfect encapsulation of how like kind of chaotic the environmental policy space can be. Even like, which I'm sure you know all too well, and it's probably very frustrating for you with someone with like a level-headed view of it all. But there was even a story in the Times this week that really dismissed the role methane emissions from fracking plays in climate change, and how they kind of framed it as a clean alternative to coal and other hazardous processes and energy sources. Rob mentioned earlier, like Biden is he's committed to not banning fracking. I mean, I've talked about it on the show a lot. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and was there for the fracking boom. And I lived, near the Marcellus and Utica shale formations. And I remember the wave of earthquakes and people dumping waste in fucking rivers, like just gas companies getting caught dumping waste in rivers. They don't give a shit. Like, that's the thing. They don't fucking care about people who live in the areas. They're there to make as much money as possible. They'll cut every corner they can until they get caught, and they just want to maximize profit. This idea that it's going to create some job boom is a total farce. But this idea that it is a clean alternative to something like coal is also untrue. Is there any movement at all on even like curtailing fracking? I mean, at least, not that this is like, something huge, but at least like Gavin Newsom is like considering not issuing any new permits. But that's like way down the line, I guess. Like it's something like setting California up for like no more after 2030. But like these are just like kicking the can down the road. So is there any traction on fracking in general in the Biden administration?
I mean, I think in general, like the whole question of not just fracking specifically, but like the whole question of what we do with natural gas is a big sort of uncharted territory for the Biden administration. And like there's a bit of I don't know, like one day you'll hear something about like the Biden administration meeting with groups that are pushing for an end to natural gas expansion. The next day there'll be some press release that like includes gas in the same category as things like wind and solar. I mean, I think that the news out of California is actually a pretty good example of like the kinds of policies we can expect. Where like, banning like new oil and gas expansion by 2045, I think it is again a big deal because like California is obviously a big producer of these things, but it's just so not in line with what the climate science says that we need to do at all. And, there's the question not only of what happens with natural gas in the U.S., but also, like, what is the Biden administration going to do when it comes to other countries expanding their natural gas infrastructure? I think it was just last year or something, Kerry was seen meeting with leaders in Vietnam saying that he, like, encouraging them to up their natural gas infrastructure. So, I mean... Like, and while he's over here being like, I'm a climate champion.
It's well, it's another thing too that makes me a little bit skeptical about all this stuff. Even if you can point out things that Biden has put forward, which are kind of encouraging. Like we pointed out during the campaign, that even though he was like basically campaigning against the Green New Deal, he did have some encouraging things in his climate policy that he was putting forward. A lot of this was advanced this week, and you can look at these things individually and be like, yeah, if this happens, I mean, this is nice. But this is the thing where it's like, not only do I doubt that this stuff will actually happen, that it is just words, but you have the American political system, which is like basically designed to ensure that things don't really ever change profoundly at all. And we're talking about this big, profound, drastic change that needs to happen in this very short span of time. It's literally it's contrary to everything the United States government is supposed to be able to do. And that's the other thing that we should all be keeping in mind, is that regardless of what promises they're making, even if they have every intention on following through on this, it also basically this whole plan relies on Democrats being in charge indefinitely, essentially, over the next 10, 15 years, which, as we've seen previously over the past couple of decades, is not always a guarantee. There's not even guarantee that Biden's going to be the president after 2024, that the Democrats are going to have this level of power. There's not at all a guarantee that some lunatic is not going to become president in 2024 and completely reverse all the minor tweaks that Biden is making, or double down on all the worst problems that are leading the crisis to get worse.
And I think that like, it brings up two really important things. One is the importance of like short-term targets. I mean, it's great to say what you're going to do by 2050 or even 2030, but if you've got 4 years that you're in office, like, what exactly are you going to do in the next 4 years? What are the big commitments you're going to make, and how are you going to stick to them? And the other thing is just like making sure that, I mean, that he does things to make climate policy popular. Like, nobody is going to want to vote for him again, or, you know, another Democrat after him if the climate is seen as like this big sort of flagship part of, you know, the Democratic Party's political campaigns, and all that you ever get from what the climate plans are like, we're going to stop you from doing XYZ. Like, there's so many opportunities to tie climate policy to things like increasing affordable housing, or like, you know, improving schools, or like, you know, roads and infrastructure that people rely on. Like, you can give people things when you enact serious climate policy. But I mean, I don't think that anyone's going to be all that excited about hearing about the, I don't know, deployment of like whatever, some like super wonky climate plan, or like hearing about Bill Gates's latest venture into developing carbon capture or anything. Like, people want to hear about things that can actually help them in their everyday lives. And I don't think that, I'm not sure that the Biden administration is doing the best job of tying those things together. I mean, it's cool to see a president, I guess, talking about like how many jobs can be created by climate policy and things like that. But even there, I think that he could be going much, much bigger. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the differences between his plans and some of the plans that came out of the squad last week, like the Green New Deal type plans, you can see that he's clearly not taking the biggest steps that he could be.
Okay, so another thing that I wanted to ask about as well, and something that we have to bring up if we're talking about the United States reducing their emissions, is the U.S. military, right?
Yeah.
And that is another thing where I wanted to point this out when you mentioned this earlier, this kind of zeroing in on the sort of China threat as a sort of example of how we need to like approach this subject. So you have them using China in this way, in a couple of different ways right now. Number one, when they're saying like, well, we have to produce this green energy, and we have to be part of this green economy in order to compete with China, who are doing the same thing. And they're also saying, China is growing and modernizing their military, so that's why we need to keep up and we need to modernize our military, even though like, I'm pretty sure it's pretty fucking modern. The U.S. military already, they're already spending more than any of their nearest competitors combined. Exactly. And they're like, believe the U.S. military is one of the biggest carbon emitters on the planet. So
the biggest.
Yeah, the biggest. Okay, I didn't want to say if I didn't know for sure, but that's right. So that's the thing. It's like, you can't really have this climate policy. It's completely incoherent when you're saying, oh, of course we want to hit these green targets. We want to invest in these green jobs and infrastructure, but we're also going to spend $700 billion every single year on our military and maintaining this costly empire. That's also, you know, the number one source of carbon emissions in the entire world. You can't really, they're kind of mutually exclusive, these two ideas, but no one seems to be grasping this.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought this up. This is something that I find like really frustrating and I think it maybe comes from just like decades of environmental policy sort of being siloed. But like, if you increase the Pentagon's budget, even if you're increasing it by less than Trump would have increased it, or less than Trump did increase it, or whatever, I feel like that was like a big headline a couple.
It's still increasing.
Yeah, exactly. There was all this like, oh, well, you know what? He's increasing it, but less than the last guy did, so that's good. And you're right, it's totally incompatible with climate policy. I mean, the United States is the single institutional largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and then also the single largest consumer of fossil fuels, like uses more fossil fuels than a bunch of like mid-sized countries. So, I mean, what exactly do you think that the threat is then, like, Biden administration? Do you think that the threat is some like sort of nebulous conflict with China or like, Russia or something, or is the threat the climate crisis? And if it's the second one, then there's really no excuse for continuing to up the Pentagon budget.
I think that's a good example of how climate policy just intersects with all these different aspects of society. And another one with like a concurrent piece of legislation is the PRO Act. And I think climate activists have been doing a really good job of pointing out how those two go hand in hand, because with the PRO Act comes more favorable labor regulations and labor guidelines that makes it easier to form a union. But the reason that jobs in like oil and gas are so lucrative is because they're all heavily unionized sectors. So if we have a PRO Act that makes it easier to form a union, that just means better paying jobs in solar and wind. So I mean, these two go hand in hand to create a more just, vibrant, green economy. I mean, we need both. They can't just be piecemeal.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I talked to Jamal Bowman about this, actually, like when the House was considering the legislation. And, the fossil fuel sector is actually, the vast majority of workers in that sector aren't unionized either. But it's true that, like, having a unionized position in any sector, including fossil fuels, makes it a whole lot harder to think about giving up your job. So, yeah, 100%. I mean, I also think just, like, anything that makes it easier to leave your job, like Medicare for All, I think is another good example of this, where like if you don't have healthcare tied to employment, it's a lot easier to start talking about what it would look like to have a new green economy, or like how to take care of workers when you're shutting down these massive sectors, things like this. I think that until we start talking about real worker protections like that, it's just going to be the same, like, either we have climate policy or we have employment myth that we've had forever. And obviously Biden has been talking a big game again about like, oh, the climate policy can create jobs. We're going to create so many jobs. We're going to create jobs. But like, what kind of jobs are you talking about? Are you talking about jobs that are unionized? Are you going to talk about jobs that have like actual livable wages? So I definitely agree. I think that, yeah, it's been really cool to see environmental organizers kind of coalesce around the PRO Act organizing. It's been a real bright spot, I think. And I think also it's like important to make those inroads with the unions who are going to be losing workers when, the big shutdowns are, like, when the big shutdowns start happening, when, when we transition away from oil, when we transition away from gas and coal, as is already happening. Obviously, like, as we have more climate policies, those things will be all the more important. But I think it's also important to remember that, like, the fossil fuel sector is already laying off workers in droves, and especially has been since the start of the pandemic, So, yeah, it's already a very good time for fossil fuel workers to have rights. It's already a really good time for more jobs in the new green economy to be unionized. And, like, it's only going to get more important as we move forward.
I wanted to also bring up the way that like the developing world gets brought up in this conversation as well, which is like not a very helpful framing, I think, where often when we talk about global emissions, the way that the media covers this Earth Day climate summit was similar to this. They never miss a breath to ensure that we all know that China is the number one emissions emitter, and the United States, and then India. And I think there's like kind of unhelpful on a number of levels. Like for one, China, the population is 5 times as much as the United States. Mm-hmm. So per capita, it's the States is the number one emitter. It's also, like you mentioned, cumulative, like the overall, the amount of carbon that's been poured into the atmosphere by the United States greatly outweighs that of anyone else. And I think on a number of levels also, it's important that if we recognize the economic decisions that were taken in the sort of neoliberal era, where in the West, in the US and Canada and these Western nations, we basically offshored our entire like manufacturing sector to the developing world, places like China and India and elsewhere. And then so it's a little bit hypocritical now when we're kind of like lecturing these countries for contributing to this this carbon emissions problem, when a lot of the time, it's not the exclusive reason, obviously. China's building tons of infrastructure and rail and cities and all kinds of things like this. But, you know, they're also building products and making products in factories that we are purchasing for cheap because we're addicted to this cheap stuff that we're getting from China, and we have been throughout the like neoliberal era.
Totally.
Yeah, it's I feel like it's an unhelpful way of framing that it becomes an excuse for people, especially conservatives, to say like, well, why do we need to cut our emissions? Look at China, look at India, when they're even worse than we are.
No, I totally agree. The whole question of like, I mean, just like globalization makes it really hard to pin responsibility on nations for emissions, right? And I think that means that it's like part of the reason that there's just a shitload of carbon emissions that nobody is accounting for. But yeah, like, I mean, Foxconn is a Taiwanese company, but they're producing stuff for Apple. That's not really factored into like the United States carbon impact at all. But in what sense is like Foxconn really a Taiwanese company then, when it's basically like a subsidiary of a US company? So no, for sure. I think that the scapegoating is pretty wild. Another example of this is like the United States offshores a bunch of its plastic pollution and then says like, oh, all the plastic in the ocean is coming from China, when in fact a lot of that actually originates in the United States. So yeah, I mean, I think that it is going to be really interesting to see like how that pans out, to see whether or not like, you know, anyone in the Biden administration can overcome that sort of scapegoating to actually work with China. One kind of encouraging thing, I guess, is that Kerry, who's obviously Biden's like climate czar, is a bit less hawkish on, on China stuff than some other folks in the administration, like, you know, Blinken, etc. But for sure, I mean, I think yes, it's very important to remember that there are emissions that are originating in China that are like, you know, generated because of the shit that the U.S. is asking for.
Yeah, like it kind of goes into, I've kind of started to pay attention to these like climate buzzwords that that leaders of countries use that, you know, are like when they're being kind of like not unserious about what the plans are. Like when they talk about innovation, we hear about innovation. They're just factoring in these like fake technologies that don't exist into our future plans and basically like counting that towards our plans. And that is kind of another thing, is net zero. We hear about net zero a lot too, which is another kind of way that like political leaders are able to obfuscate this issue, talking about net zero, which in a lot of the cases is just about like moving numbers around and like kind of like, you know, if we're not actually decreasing global emissions, but we just have the US and Canada and these other countries kind of like claiming less than what they really are, or like moving numbers around so it doesn't count towards our emissions, we're not actually doing anything to confront the problem.
No, totally. And sometimes it's actually even worse than doing nothing. Like there's been cases, for instance, where countries will say like, oh, we're going to offset our emissions by like planting a bunch of trees somewhere. And then in order to make room to plant those trees, they'll like displace thousands of indigenous people from the place that they live in order to make room for them. So yeah, like it's at best doing nothing. It's at best just like, you know, shirking some of your responsibility. And at worst, it's actually violent. Like, I mean, I prefer that we just owned up to our own emissions, because at least it would be easier to hold the United States accountable versus being like, oh, well, we're going to, you know, it's fine. We're going to displace some people to plant some trees over somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, it was amazing with Justin Trudeau. I mean, I saw him at this climate summit and he's talked about the 1 billion trees. Oh, yeah. We're pledging to plant 1 billion trees. And he says this and he looks so self-satisfied. And it's like, he's been in power here in Canada 5 years. Not one goddamn tree has been planted. So it's like, again, it just goes back to the thing of like, at what point do we still need to keep taking people like Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau seriously when they say this stuff, when there's just so much evidence that none of their words are actually having any impact? Of course, we're doing the indigenous displacement. We're doing that part, but we're not actually following through on the tree thing. And that's why I'm starting to get really fed up with powerful people like this who have ability to make these big, profound changes. asking to get a big pat on the back for using the right words and talking about this, but not actually doing anything. It's becoming ever more frustrating the closer we get to this crisis, really getting out of control.
Yeah, I agree. And I also kind of fear that, like, we are so used to either, like, someone like Trump, who doesn't even say that he's going to do anything and then doesn't, or makes things worse, or someone like Trudeau, who makes promises and then doesn't follow through on them, that now I think when we see anything happen, like I remember, on the first day of when Biden took office, right? Like when he took the White House, he signed all those climate executive orders. He rescinded the Keystone XL pipeline, put this moratorium on drilling.
That was cool.
Yeah. A moratorium for drilling and leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But yeah, like that's cool. But what about all the other ones? Like what about Dakota Access? What about Line 3? Like,
yeah.
Wasn't there something recently that like the Keystone pipeline is like they're still going? It's in a review period now.
Yeah.
And so they're still actually like there's still oil flowing through it, but just like they're going to review it.
Yeah. Jason Kenney and Justin Trudeau are doing the Dumb and Dumber thing. You're telling me there's a chance? They're still they were really not happy about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, Dharna, I know you have to go soon. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and break this stuff down for us. We really appreciated it. It was great to talk to you. Do you want to just let everyone know where they can find your work and where they can find you online, all that stuff?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, y'all. This was so fun. I write on Earther, and you can find that at earther.gizmodo.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at my name, DHARNA, on Twitter. This was really fun. Thanks, y'all.
Of course. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and that was Dharna Noor, professional gamer, you heard from just now.
Exactly.
So we're happy to...
Professional gigapetter.
That's right, yeah. Okay, well, thanks. We'll talk to you soon, Dharna. Thanks again.
Well, thanks so much, y'all. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Insurgents. Please remember to subscribe over at theinsurgents.substack.com. Find the podcast on all your favorite podcast apps, and please remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's very helpful, and we appreciate it a lot. But please, again, don't mention Ken Klippenstein in the review. He is banned from the show. It's a lifetime ban, so please do not mention him in the review. And we'll be back later this week with more of the content that you know and love. Goodbye.